They put my hands on the plate before I had finished sitting down. That was the first thing I noticed about the Kethville intake registry. The plate came first, before the chair was fully under me, before the overhead panel had cycled to full brightness. A flat disc of pale composite material, roughly the size of a dinner tray, embedded flush in the surface of the processing bay desk. The officer across from me, six-fingered, amber-skinned, with the patient expressionless quality of someone who had run 10,000 verifications and found them uniformly dull, said nothing. Just gestured at the plate with two fingers, the way you gesture at a person who had somehow forgotten how to sit at a table. I put my hands on it. Bay 6 of the Kethville registry was not an unpleasant room. That was the thing that stayed with me long after, and still stays with me now. The lighting was good, bright overhead panels, warm white, the kind of even light you'd want in a kitchen or a repair shop. The walls were a pale composite, the same neutral tone as the plate. There were no bars on anything, no guards visible, no obvious machinery of detention. It looked less like a holding facility and more like a very clean administrative office where someone had removed all the paper. If you did not know what a failed verification meant, if you did not know that the registry could flag you as a template copy, strip your transit status, and hand you to the remand division for biologic reassignment, you might have sat down in Bay 6 and felt reasonably calm. I knew what a failed verification meant. I had known a man named Gus Varen who had failed one, 6 years earlier. He had come out of the remand division with his gait wrong and his left eye slightly different color than it had been before. He didn't talk about what had happened, and I never asked, because the answer would not have helped either of us. So I put my hands on the plate. I held them still. I watched the officer's eyes move to his screen. His name, I learned later, was Velth Saran. Intake officer, Class 3, Orvith Compliance Registry, stationed at Kethville on a rotating assignment. He had been doing this for 11 years. His verification sequence ran, I was told afterward, at an average of 4 minutes and 20 seconds per subject, the fastest in the building, and not because he cut corners. He was simply efficient in the way that people become when a task has become entirely automatic, when the hands and eyes do the work without consulting the mind. The sequence began. I felt the plate warm slightly under my palms, not heat, exactly, but a low-frequency vibration that moved up through the skin and then stopped. The panel above Saran's screen populated with lines of data I could not read from where I sat today. He watched them scroll. I watched his face. His expression did not change. It had the settled quality of a man watching rain. Bone density, matched. Retinal geometry, matched. Language pattern mapping, matched. Cellular age strata, matched. I could not read the screen, but I knew the sequence by reputation, bone density first, then retinal geometry, then language pattern mapping through the tactile nerve array in the fingertips, then cellular age strata, which took the longest. Saran waded through each stage with the patient indifference of a man watching water boil. I had begun, carefully and without letting it show on my face, to breathe again. Then the plate's vibration changed. It was subtle, a slight irregularity in the frequency, as if the machinery had found something unexpected and was running the scan a second time to confirm it hadn't made an error. I felt it in the left hand first, then the right. Then only in the left hand again. Then only in one specific place on the left hand, which was the inner pad of the left thumb, roughly 12 millimeters from the first joint. Saran's eyes moved from the main screen to a secondary panel I hadn't noticed, lower, smaller, offset to his right. His expression did not change, but he stopped typing. That was when I understood that something was wrong. He ran the subscan 3 times. I counted the vibration cycles. 3 full passes over the same 12 millimeter patch of skin on the left thumb, each one slightly slower than the last, as if the machine were trying to be certain it was reading what it thought it was reading. Then Saran leaned back in his chair, not far, just an inch, just enough to indicate that this was no longer a routine task, and looked at me directly for the first time. "You have an anomaly," he said. He said it the way a mechanic says your fuel line is cracked. Not alarming, not accusatory, just informational. A statement of fact about a thing that required further attention. "Left thumb," I said. "Inner pad." He looked at me without expression. "You're aware of it." "I've had it for 20 years. He returned his gaze to the secondary panel. I could not see what was on it, but I could see the quality of his attention, the slight forward tilt, the stillness of his hands over the input surface. He was reading something carefully. "The registry has no classification for this tissue configuration," he said. The scar topology index registers the structure as anomalous, non-standard accumulation, layered, asymmetric. It does not match any documented injury pattern. It's not an injury, I said. He looked at me again. It's a callus, I said. A grip callus. From the crane controls. He said nothing. The amber pupils tracked to his screen, then back to me. Cargo cranes, I said. I ran the dock cranes at Vetos Anchorage for 20 years. The left-hand grip on the lateral swing control, the lever is offset to the left of center, and the load balancing requires a constant pressure from the thumb pad against the inner ridge of the grip housing. 20 years of that pressure, 3 shifts a week minimum, and you get a 12mm patch of compacted keratin on the inside of the left thumb that no scan pattern in the registry will have a category for, because no registry was built to catalog what a specific crane lever does to a specific part of a specific hand over 2 decades. The silence in Bay 6 was complete enough that I could hear the faint tick of the overhead panel cycling through its brightness calibration. Saran did not respond immediately. He was reading. Whatever was on the secondary panel had his full attention, and I had the impression, the clear, unambiguous impression, that what he was reading was not confirming what he expected. He tapped a query into the input surface, waited, read the result, tapped another. His face remained entirely neutral, but his pace had changed. He was working now, not processing. You operated cargo equipment, he said, finally. It was not quite a question. Load crane operator, Class 2, registered at Vetos Anchorage. 22 years. Retired on medical, the shoulder, not the hand. He pulled the secondary panel fully into view and angled it so I could see it. I am not fluent in Orvith script, but I could read the color coding well enough to understand what I was looking at. The topographic scan of my left thumb's inner pad was displayed as a 3-dimensional contour map, small ridges of compacted tissue rising and falling in the uneven pattern of something that had grown under repeated directional stress, year by year, without any plan or design. Like a coral formation. Like the way stone wears under moving water, not random, but not intended either. Just the accumulated result of a long time and a specific repeated force. Beside it, a registry comparison field showed what a normal thumb pad should look like. The contrast was not subtle. The registry does not have a code for this, Saran said. Occupational callus formation, specific tool variants. We have categories for impact scarring, thermal scarring, chemical scarring, incision scarring. We do not have a category for gradual accumulation under sustained directional load. He said this without apparent judgment, but I heard underneath it the first faint note of something that was not quite professional concern but was adjacent to it. A template would not carry this. No, I said. A template wouldn't. The thing about template copies, the thing that the Orvith registry existed to catch, was that they were built from recorded data. Bone density, retinal geometry, language patterns, cellular age strata, all of those could be captured in a single high-resolution scan and reproduced with sufficient precision to pass a standard verification. The registry knew this. The entire verification sequence existed because the registry knew this. So they ran the full biologic battery, looking for the small things that recording didn't catch cleanly, a healed fracture that the original scan hadn't fully mapped, a vaccination marker from a childhood dose that predated the registry's records, an eye dominance pattern that the retinal geometry capture had logged but not weighted correctly. They had never, in 11 years of Velth Saran's experience, flagged a tool callus. Because it had never come up before. Because the people who typically ran cargo cranes at dock anchorages for 22 years did not typically end up in an Orvith compliance intake bay being verified for template status. Because the registry's anomaly index was built to find things that were missing or wrong in a reconstructed body, not things that were present and real and accumulated and simply outside every category the index had ever been asked to hold. Saran called a second officer. I heard the words spoken into a side channel, not alarmed, not urgent, but definitive in the way that means this is outside my authority to resolve alone. The second officer came from Bay 2, a younger one with the same amber-toned skin and the same expressionless efficiency, and Saran walked her through the secondary panel findings in 3 sentences. She looked at the contour map. She looked at me. She looked at the comparison field. Then she pulled a physical instrument from the equipment rack at the side of the bay, a handheld probe, small and calibrated, which I learned later was used for tactile topology verification when the plate scan produced results the index couldn't categorize. She ran it across the inner pad of my left thumb slowly, 4 passes in different orientations, reading the output on a small integrated display. She handed it to Saran. He looked at the reading and then set the probe down on the desk between us. This is biological accumulation, he said. Not reconstructed tissue. Not introduced material. Not a prosthetic overlay. He said each of these things as if reading from a checklist, because he was. The topology is consistent with sustained unidirectional mechanical stress applied over a period of not less than 15 years and not more than 30. 22, I said. 22, he repeated, as if logging it. He looked at me for a moment with the first expression I had seen from him that was not purely procedural, not warm, not anything so generous as warm, but attentive in a way that acknowledged I was a person and not a case file. The registry has no fraud vector that produces this outcome, he said. There is no template construction method we have on record that replicates gradual mechanical callus formation in specific topographic pattern. The scar tissue layering alone requires years of continuous stimulus. He paused. It cannot be faked. No, I said. It can't. He closed the secondary panel. He made 3 notations on the primary screen. He picked up a small stamp seal from the desk, physical, not digital, the kind used for final verification release, and pressed it to the document that had been building on the screen since I'd sat down. The seal made a soft definitive sound, the kind of sound that ends things. You're cleared, he said. Full biologic verification, primary status confirmed. You can collect your transit credentials at the desk by the main exit. I stood. I picked up my bag from the floor beside the chair. I looked at the plate on the desk, the flat pale disc that had run through everything I was and found, in the end, the one small piece of me it couldn't account for. The crane controls, Saran said, as I turned toward the door. The lever. You said it was offset to the left. 2 centimeters, I said. Every model they made, for 40 years. Some engineer's decision, early on, and then it just became the standard. Nobody ever changed it. He nodded once. Not satisfied, not dismissive. Something more like filing it away, a piece of information that had no category, and which he would carry now without being able to set it down. I walked out of Bay 6 into the corridor that led to the main exit. The overhead lights were the same warm white as the processing room, bright and even, the kind of light that doesn't cast shadows. I pressed my right thumb against the inner pad of my left thumb as I walked, feeling the ridge of thickened skin there, not hard enough to be bone, not soft enough to be normal, just present, specific, accumulated. 22 years of the same grip on the same lever, each shift pressing the same 12 millimeters of skin against the same ridge of the same housing, until the skin had learned the shape of the thing and kept it. I had worked those cranes for 22 years and never once thought of the callus as anything other than an occupational inconvenience. Something that snagged on fabric sometimes, that made certain touchscreen interfaces slightly less responsive, that my wife had run her thumb across once and called a map of everywhere I'd been. I thought about that now. A map of everywhere I'd been. The Orvith registry could reconstruct the coordinates. It could reconstruct the language, the bone, the eye. It could build from a scan something that walked like me and answered to my name and might have passed every check in the sequence, except the one that required 22 years and a 2 centimeter offset and the particular stubbornness of skin. That was the thing you couldn't record. Not because it was invisible, but because it only existed if you had actually been there, in the dark of a Vethos Anchorage pre-dawn, hand on the lever, load swinging out over the water, doing the work. Day after day. Year after year. The callus didn't prove I was Davos. It proved I was someone who had been somewhere real for a long time, doing something real, and that the somewhere and the something had left a mark. The registry had no record for it. I pressed my thumb harder against my palm and kept walking.